Many of us dream of owning a winery, but for one person in particular, that dream included going back to school to study chemistry and biology, going to Bordeaux to actually learn firsthand, and then also, if it was going to be a complete dream, he wanted to plant the vineyard himself. Tonight's guest on SIP episode 111, David Jeffrey of Calluna Vineyards and this majestic property in Chalk Hill, Sonoma. The critics are starting to pay attention. Welcome to SIP episode 111. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels, and this, in fact, is SIP episode 111. This is amazing that we're on 111 episodes, and tonight is going to be jam-packed with information and content and pictures, so you're going to have to listen fast and pay attention and buckle up. This is a very, very, very big night. One other comment with regards to SIP episode 111, we're going to be drinking an exceptional Bordeaux blend Cuvee this evening. And many of us have this Cuvee in our glass already, and most people always ask, how did they do that? How did these people get the glass or get the wine in their glass ahead of time? And the answer is simple. You have to go to the Cellar Angels website. So when you go to the Cellar Angels website, and I'll go over here, you get to the shop page and you can see the SIP kit right here. So the SIP kit has 6 wines in it right now because it's jam-packed for the end of the season, and it's sweeps week on the networks. So we're paying very close attention and pulling out all the stops. But we've got Tom Rinaldi, who will be wrapping up the SIP schedule in December. But right now, if you order this kit, you can sip along with guests like our guest that's going to be coming up. And his wine is just a magical, magical story because he gets told this all the time. And I'm going to say it again. If this wine was made 3 miles away across a valley line, this would be in the 90s instead of the 30s. And it is one of the more exceptional bottles that I've ever had in my wine life at sub $40. It is an incredible cuvee. So go to the Cellar Angels website. Keep in mind, Wine Club members, you get 10% off anything on the website 24/7, 365. So if you're not in the Wine Club, that's a good incentive right there. Let me get on with this because he's been sitting in the green room drinking wine and eating M&Ms. And so it gives me an unbelievable pleasure and honor to introduce to you tonight's guest for SIP episode 111. Ladies and gentlemen, if we had applause, I would cue the soundtrack. Give it up for David Jeffrey of Calluna Vineyards. Not bad.
Hello, Martin. Thank you very much. No M&Ms, but I do have a little wine here and look forward to sipping along with everybody.
The Sipsters are in great hands tonight with you. You will recognize the birthday boy, Jim, who was at your estate. And I think the estate will speak for itself, or we're going to get into the estate. But Calluna, where is Calluna?
So Calluna is in the Chalk Hill appellation of Sonoma County. And I think you'll probably have a map later, but we're located physically between the towns of Windsor and Healdsburg. And in that, so we're east of 101. We're near the property of Chalk Hill Winery, which if people have heard of a winery in this appellation, it's often Chalk Hill Winery itself, which was kind of the earliest and pushed for the naming of the appellation as Chalk Hill.
Interesting. So I did not know it was one of the earliest.
Well, yeah, a guy named Fred Firth founded that property in about 1972. It's a big property, about 1,300 acres now, about 300 acres planted. And it's in the rolling hills. It's actually a little bit to our east, and we have a kind of a similar topography as they do. We're a little closer to the ocean, so I think maybe we run a little bit cooler, but overall, yeah. Oh, okay. So you want to speak to that, Martin? Or
yeah, and we'll get into this when we do Google Earth, but I think it's great to break down. This is Sonoma County for the most part. And Chalk Hill is right in the heart of Sonoma County with the relation to all the AVAs. And what most people don't recognize is that It's an AVA, but it's a sub AVA within the Russian River. So this gives you an idea of just how massive the Russian River AVA is. I mean, it is a huge, huge AVA. And then it's so big that it has two sub AVAs. You know, it has Chalk Hill as part of it and Green Valley. But you specifically, as you mentioned, are east of 101, which runs right through this area here.
Right.
And we'll have a couple more maps on this a little bit later, but I'm curious from a climate perspective, you know, how does Chalk Hill differ from Fort Ross Seaview, from Dry Creek, Alex Valley?
Sure. Well, let me just start by saying that the most important terroir element in this part of the world is the climate and how cool or warm your climate is, that being driven by how close to the ocean you are. So this map here correctly shows that Sonoma County is on the Pacific Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean in this part of the world is a very cool body of water. So if you're in that coastal area or the lower part of the Russian River or Green Valley, you're in a pretty cool area, and growers therefore plant Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which are more adapted towards cooler weather. Now, as you go northeast, somewhat paradoxically, it gets warmer. And so in the Chalk Hill appellation, we are a bit warmer than the Russian River Valley and the coastal areas, but we're definitely cooler than the Alexander Valley and the Napa Valley. So you see, when we're growing Bordeaux varietals, which, you know, otherwise are found generally in the Alexander Valley or the Napa Valley, when we're growing them in the Chalk Hill appellation, we're actually in a cooler area. So on average, we're a little cooler. I feel we can get the fruit riper at somewhat lower sugar levels, and that helps us make the types of wines I'm looking to make. So that was, to me, the most important element of the Chalk Hill appellation, the way it's cited there. So yes, how is it Fort Ross? How is that different from the Alexander Valley or whatever? Just huge temperature differences, again, driven by the Pacific Ocean.
Interesting. And when you say it lends itself well to the types of wines I want to make, I don't think you wake up one day and have an epiphany to say, hey, this is the type of wine I want to make. That has to be built upon some sort of exposure to wines. Where did that come from to where you actually formulated a conclusion on the types of wines you wanted to craft and make?
Yeah, well, I got very interested in wines in the early mid 80s. I had a more typical finance job. I was actually working for the company Seagram in New York, the liquor company, and they had a big wine division at the time, which I had nothing to do with. But Seagram was going to put a lot of their employees through this wine appreciation course. So I went ahead and took that. It was a very interesting course, and I just stuck with it, meaning I continued to read about wine, visit wine country, and I started collecting wine big time. And when you're on the East Coast, you know, you tend to look towards France and Italy as the benchmarks, and of course, some of the classic Californians. But back then, you know, those benchmark wines were France and Italy. And I did kind of fall in love with the wines of Bordeaux in particular.
So prior to that course, I mean, you're working finance at Seagram's and you took a course that the company offered on wine.
Right.
And prior to that, it was just like, you know, not so much, or
I was
more of a spirits guy, or
I was vaguely interested in wine. You know, I probably drank much more beer, and if somebody brought a bottle of wine, I remember always being a little intrigued and befuddled by it. But yeah, you know, the wine course, that's what I always tell people, if, you know, read a good basic wine book or take a good basic wine course, because once you learn a little about wine, then you start to understand and you can build on that and learn a lot. And I just, you know, and then I met and married my wife, Marla, whose business sells to the wine industry. So, you know, over time, it became all wine all the time for us, you know, when we, you know, because we had talked about doing something like Calluna maybe when we retire. But I went to a job change and I said, how about this? Maybe we do this now while I'm still young enough to actually participate in it. Because for me, doing this right really meant three things. I wanted to go back to wine school and learn the chemistry and biology. I wanted to work for a while in Bordeaux so I could understand what goes on there versus what goes on in California. given again my love of Bordeaux wines. And finally, I was hoping to plant my own vineyard instead of just buying a vineyard. And we were able to accomplish those three things. I mean, we were fortunate. We had
that's a serious thought consideration, because not only did you want to have some sort of involvement in the wine industry, but like you said, you had three specific goals, and that's fascinating. And I can appreciate, as a New Yorker looking east to France and Europe and old world wines and that sort of thing, and then the life change or career change and doing it. The ability to desire to go back and study the chemistry and biology of it, that seems to me Herculean in effort.
Yeah. Well, I like those sorts of things. I felt it was important to know that, to be a good winemaker. And, I enjoy school too, and so it was like going back to college. It was really quite amusing. I mean, Fresno State, where I went, has a tradition of some older people returning and going through the wine program. But I was also there with some, freshmen and sophomore who were basically majoring in enology and viticulture. So I had my young buddies there through school. So it was fun.
Your study partners. No, that's awesome. By the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't share last week's quiz winner. So I don't know what is happening in the water, because Brent H again with the quiz answer in the fastest amount of time. This week's question was, legs on a wine glass indicate what? And the answer was B, sugar and or alcohol content. And Brent is not on, and we instituted a new rule that winners need be present. So Brent, because we can give points, we can also take away points. So we're taking away all of your points that you've accumulated. Jim B, the birthday person, is on, and he also had the right answer. So that's incredible, as did Natalie S. Alicia, good to see you. Britt, good to see you. Again, Martin Cody here, co-founder of Cellar Angels. You may be asking, what is Cellar Angels? Cellar Angels is our attempt to dent the world with wine, to borrow a line from Steve Jobs. Founded in 2010, we are a direct-to-consumer wine company focusing solely on the limited production wineries of Napa and Sonoma, 99% of which you would never encounter in a retail environment or a restaurant, just because they simply don't make enough wine, and no distributor economically wants to move boxes around in 30 different markets because they can't get enough of it. So these are the folks, in our opinion, again, that are the tapestry of fine wine in Napa and Sonoma. And a perfect example is David this evening with Calluna. Now, the name Calluna, what is the origin there?
Yeah, well, Calluna is the botanical name for the plant heather. And if you've got your bottle of Calluna there, you'll see that. We were originally going to name the property after a girl named Heather, who was a close family friend who unfortunately died young. We were going to use like Heather Ridge or something like that, but we couldn't do it because it was trademarked. But then we stumbled across the fact that the plant heather has this nice botanical name, Calluna. So we decided to try that, and it worked out well because people liked it better, and we were able to trademark the name. So each of our bottlings, we're only focusing on the one bottle tonight, but our other bottles have this labels the same, but with a different colored stenciled heather plant on them. So they all have their own little personality that way.
Super cool. And the bottle is beautiful, and the label is beautiful as well. And I'm curious, what is, since you talked about all the other bottles, walk us through the portfolio.
Yeah, so we make one white wine every year here, which we call Calluna Estate Blanc. That's made in the tradition of the dry white wines of Bordeaux. So for those who know white Bordeaux, it's a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. I barrel ferment that one, but not very little new oak involved in that. So the one white wine. Then we make Calluna Vineyards Cuvee, which we're trying tonight. It's our kind of our standard bearer wine. It's a Bordeaux blend leading with Merlot, and then it has the other 4 red grape varietals we grow here on the property, all estate fruit, as all our wines are. And Calluna Vineyards Cuvée is our largest production, about 1,500-1,700 cases per year. So not huge, but big for us. And it is the one that gets around the most, because frankly, I've tried to price it at a point where it's very competitive in the market for a serious Bordeaux blend that's all state fruit, handwork vines. I think the quality, it does well, and we get a lot of good reviews for that, both its quality and its value. Then our flagship wine is called Calluna Estate, which is a Cabernet-driven blend, and that we select some of our best fruit for and make a relatively smaller bottling. And then I also bottle a couple of our single vineyards that we wanted to highlight. We have a Cabernet called the Colonel's Vineyard, which is a beautiful cab that we bottle on its own. And our Merlot are my tribute to the folks I work for in Saint Emilia and the Reynaud family. My bottling is called Merlot au Reynaud. And both those single vineyard bottlings are small and tend to be wine club offerings, but they are out there.
Izzy, very nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. And you mentioned Bordeaux, and I know it was near and dear to your heart when you started taking the wine class, but also in one of the 3 requirements or 3 things that you wanted to check off before you did this on your own was actually going to Bordeaux and studying and making wine there. So how does one do that?
Well, and I did to these 3 goals, I took kind of a step at a time, and there was always, we discussed with my wife, and we had 3 young kids. They were 7 through 9 at the time we left New Jersey and moved to Fresno. That, if I went to wine school and that was all that happened, we would come back to New Jersey and we would be happy and move on. But we were able to take those steps, as we went. So the thing about working in Bordeaux, I presented that to the head of the program at Fresno State, saying, what I want to do is an independent study where I work 3 months in California and 3 months in Bordeaux. And then I will come back and do a presentation comparing the areas. And
nice.
So the point is, the wines are a bit different. Is that due to terroir, or is it due to choices that are made in the vineyard and the
terroir or technique?
Yeah. So, Fresno State, and I won't go into this, a long story, said, oh, that's a great idea, but you have to find the jobs. And I said, no problem. I've been collecting these Bordeaux wines for so long. I'm just going to write to Chateau Lynch-Bages or Pichon-Lalande, and they're going to welcome me with open arms. But they didn't respond, and I was sort of flabbergasted. But then I started to realize that these entities are pretty big, and they tend to be owned by large corporate entities,
like Seagram's.
Yeah, well, yeah, and AXA, the big French insurance company,
LVMH, what have you.
Yeah, but I finally, I got an introduction from the critic Steve Tanzer. He offered, 5 or so chateaux that he thought would be open to it, and then I wisely asked Steve, could I use your name when I approached them? And he said yes. And at the time, Steve Tanzer was arguably the number 3 critic out there. So people paid attention then, and I was able to get this job at Chateau Quinault-L'Enclos in Saint Emilia. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful spot. I lived at the chateau, had all my meals for the family and the other workers. And Alain Reynaud is a prominent consultant in Bordeaux too, so he got me around to see lots of people.
And how long were you there for?
Just there 3 months, but it's the perfect 3 months where I arrive at harvest, so I'm seeing the harvest, crush line, alcohol fermentation, malolactic fermentation, then barrel down. And so you're seeing the most important elements of winemaking there. And then I've gone back every other year or so. We go back and at different times of year, so we see different elements of what's going on.
And do you always, I'm sure you visit a couple of other properties, but do you always go back to where you started?
Oh, well, yeah, with the one exception now, the Reynauds have sold Chateau Quinault. They sold it to the folks who own Cheval Blanc, so it's in very good hands. So I'll go back to see the Reynauds. We have a favorite hotel in Bordeaux we stay at as a base, and try to get around to the regions. And yeah, it's always a learning experience, and in our Chalk Hill appellation right here, right behind us, a very prominent couple from Bordeaux, Claire and Gonzague Lurton, bought a property here, and they make wine, very much in our style too, and or I make wine in their style, perhaps, who knows? But but they're they're wonderful. They own a couple great chateaux, so we visited them and their chateau, and
super nice.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So when Cellar Angels goes to Bordeaux, can we use your name?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know what currency that'll bring, but if you contact me before,
Oh,
maybe
it'll
I
be
can.
better than using our name.
Well, I
That
can
I
think of
promise
some
you.
ideas for you, for sure.
No, that is fantastic. And it's also another compelling example about what makes this industry so wonderful, and not just the California wine industry, but you go over to Bordeaux, you get to stay in the chateau, have the meals with the family, and learn from the ground up. I mean, it's
Yeah.
even if you never made wine again, you would have that experience with you for the rest of your life.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, it was wonderful.
It's pretty special. So let's chat a little bit about the Cuvee. And you mentioned it is obviously the largest production of the portfolio. It has all 5 Bordeaux varietals.
Right.
And 2018, tell me about the vintage. Tell me about, like, you talked about Chalk Hill being representative of an area where it would allow you to make the types of wines you wanted to make.
Yeah, yeah.
What are those types of wines?
Well, and if people have the wine here, I would love to talk through it with you. This really shows what I try to do with all my red wines, and which is to say, I want them to be ripe without being over the top ripe into the big jammy elements. And again, this is why I've chosen the Chalk Hill growing area, because it's a little cooler on average again than other places around here where Bordeaux varietals tend to be grown. So I feel I can get the grapes ripe from a physiological point of view, from a flavor point of view, at somewhat lower sugar levels. And when you do that, it's very easy to turn the grapes into wine without having to manipulate alcohol levels or acid levels. They turn into wine very easily. And what you're left with is a wine that is fully ripe. Like, you smell this, I don't think you're going to smell anything green or basis, veggie, It's fully ripe, but it's not just sweet fruit. There's savory elements to the wine. There's natural acidity here. There's moderate alcohol. There's a little bit of tannin, but it's not grippy tannin. I think it's the appropriate level of tannin that makes a good counterpoint for food. And, when you put all those things together, again, that's what I call traditional balance in wine. And when you have that, it goes really well with food, and it has the ability to age great. And so we find our wines, they're drinkable on release. You can enjoy them, but boy, they sure age well too.
Well, and I think that's important. Both of those elements are important. And I want to show some folks, when you look at the Calluna product page on Cellar Angels, the tasting notes actually are done by Mission Control and Ivy, and they spend a great deal of time going over, actually on this one, just Ivy, but you do get, as David mentioned, the velvety tannins that give it that backbone. And it's not gripping. You don't feel as if you've got that stuck peanut butter, black tea sensation in your mouth, but also the text sheet. Text sheet gives you a great breakdown. It is Merlot dominant, probably, paying homage to the right bank side of things. And the Merlot, in my opinion, gives it that soft, aromatic, velvet, silky texture that is not that over fruit forward dominance that sometimes you get in Cabernet. Just a wonderful, wonderful wine. And even at 1,538 cases, not a huge production. So, David, what is total production for the entire estate? On average,
we just completed our 16th harvest here. And when we have big years, we're pushing towards 4,000 cases per year. And I've been knocked off that a little bit because as I think we got hit by the Kincaid fire on one side of our property in 2019, and I lost about 15% of my vineyard. So I've been replanting that. We're going into year 3 next year, where we'll start some production again. So I got to get back onto my path, but I view our production here on good years as being about 4,000 cases.
Got it. And you talked about this wine has the ability to age. So it's already 4 years old, coming up on 5.
Yep.
How long would you age this wine?
Well, I've got at least one critic that puts it out 30 to 40 years, and that's not, it'll improve for a great deal and then hold for that kind of period of time. We may not be around to test that hypothesis, but certainly for quite some time. I mean, We started making wine in '07, and I just opened a couple of the '07s recently when we had a special guest here, and they are just showing beautifully and not at all tired. There's not any tired element at all. There's some elements of development, but they're in perfect shape. And so it's hard to say, but this 18, it's just so packed with flavor and fruit, which are driven by those, that so-called phenolic content, which it acts as an antioxidant as the wine slowly ages and bottle over time. And it's got good acidity too, that wines will age on acidity. And so it's very promising, the future of that wine.
Interesting. And you talked about the three elements or three things that you wanted to accomplish or check off if you were going to make wine. One, go to Bordeaux or go back to school and learn the chemistry and biology. Two, go to Bordeaux, and three, plant your own vineyard. And I find all three fascinating, quite honestly. But this one, I think, is the one that is intriguing to me above the others, because you don't come from an agricultural farming background. Most everybody that doesn't hires a vineyard manager or someone of that viticulturist type of stuff to go ahead and do the planting for them. But you wanted to have, your hands in the dirt and do it yourself. Why was that so important?
Well, it just to be really part of it. I have made this very much a hands-on project. I mean, it's kind of a dream project for me, and so I wanted to be right there doing it, and not just not just somebody who comes in and pays to have it done, and I wasn't in that type of position anyway, like some of the great folks who go to Napa Valley. I'm not knocking those wealthy people. Some are very passionate about wine, but they've got a lot of money that means it doesn't really have to be a business proposition for them. But for me, we had to raise, in order to acquire this property, we had to raise money. We have quite a number of investors here that they love the wine aspect of it and they're super supportive, but I have to run it as a business too. So I'm very involved in it from that aspect, and I'm very involved with it from the get-go on the planting. So I mean, one of the things that made me want to plant my own vineyard is that a lot of the existing vineyards around here are planted where the vines are trained on these very large plants trained as cordons. And whereas the plants from Bordeaux and most of Europe tend to be smaller plants, packed much more densely, planted much more densely, I mean closer together, and trained with what's called cane pruning. And so I wanted to do that style of vineyard and planting of the vineyard, training of the vineyard. And I'm not the only one who does that. Many at least of new vineyards are planted today in California the way I'm describing, but historically they've been planted differently.
No, and Paul has a great question, because a second ago or a moment ago, when you were describing the ageability of the Cuvee, you mentioned that you pulled out some of the 07s and you didn't view that they had any, quote, elements of development as aging. What would you consider like an element of development of aging? I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is color.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, I actually said they do have very nice elements showing some aging and development. And, but that's different from what I call tired aspects or tired elements. The tired elements are, primarily oxidation, but they can also, the tired elements can be like color, too much degradation of color, and too much degradation of acidity, like the wine gets too soft, it gets too, too bricky, too soft, and goes towards that little bit of, sherry tone in the nose, that oxidation. That's what you don't want to see if you want your wine to be continuing to improve and hold on. But no, what you do see are, the colors can soften. Right now this wine is a, very dark red color, and it will soften where the edges get a little bricky and go in that direction. But you have these secondary aromas, some people call bouquet, coming out of the wine, where the Bordeaux varietals can get a little bit of that mushroomy, truffly tone. And another tone
Right.
you often see in Bordeaux varietals is, it sounds bad when you say cigar box or tobacco-y, but it's a little bit in that direction, but
Mhm.
very pretty. And those are, kind of the classic, uh, bouquet elements, secondary aroma elements that arise from these varietals.
No, it's so funny because I love that cigar box
Yeah.
element from that
Yeah.
secondary. Perfect. Very well. All right. I know folks are wondering how we're going to test their knowledge this evening. So let's go back to the first poll question, or actually not even go back to it. Let's just go to it. So Sonoma County has how many AVAs? And I'm not going to let you count them in that map. 18, 19, 20, or 23. I wonder if I can move that picture away. This is where people put a lot of money. There's not many folks recognize, David, that this is a big parimutuel waging opportunity. There's a new software functionality we're putting in place to test. You've seen the NFL games. I mean, you can't watch an NFL football game without having 23 bombarding betting commercials in the middle of plays. And it's unbelievable how much gambling there is. All right, we're going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, how many people picked up their smartphone to Google AVAs in Sonoma? I'm curious. We operate on the honor system here. So we have at least every answer has someone choosing it. But in particular, David, want to fathom a guess? Because I know it changes.
Oh, me?
Yep.
No, because I was going to say I didn't do it because I thought you might consider me an expert, but I don't know the answer is the real reason I didn't do it.
The answer is, and I want people to tell me who this is. The answer is 18. There are 18 AVAs in Sonoma County. And it's kind of funny, in my opinion, because it seems, when Napa gets one, Sonoma's got to get one. Then Sonoma gets one and Napa's got to get one. So it does seem to be a little Hatfield and McCoy-ish, but I think they're both at 18 right now.
Yeah, interesting.
With Coombsville being the latest in Napa. All right, one more question. Charisse, it's okay that you were wrong because we can fit you in a carry-on when we go to Bordeaux. Chalk Hill is the smallest AVA in Sonoma. True or false? Wow, a lot of people with their smartphones. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've got 14 people with the correct answer. Extra credit if you throw it in the chat without looking at your phone, pencils down. What is the smallest AVA in Sonoma? I will give you a few seconds if anybody wants to. Julie F, incorrect on Green Valley, but that's a heck of a guess. The answer is no. Christopher, great guess with Rockpile, is Bennett Valley. Jeff and Jane, Petaluma is one of the larger ones. So that's actually a great job. Rockpile is such a good AVA as well. So I do want to, before we get to Google Earth, is have David was so kind to send over a deck. And I think this deck gives you a view of the property that you're not going to get elsewhere. And you're not going to even get it with Google Earth because this is it behind me. It's incredible, this property. It is not for the faint of heart driving there. And I would encourage you getting there during the day. Because I would imagine some of us landlubber city slickers that don't get out in the countryside too often, getting there at night could be a little bit challenging the first time or two. So I will get this deck going if I can find it. Alicia with both questions right. Congratulations. That is impressive as all get out. So here we go on the deck, and I'm going to have David drive. He's going to narrate. I'm going to actually guide and control the advancement. So Calluna, we already learned about the name.
Yeah.
Terrible view.
Yeah, so this is looking
very
south,
crowded.
looking southwest towards the ocean over the Russian River Valley from the top of our property. That's the the Colonel's Vineyard Cabernet block that I mentioned earlier. And so, I'm just showing a couple shots. You can advance here, and these couple shots of the vineyard basically as they exist today. So go ahead to the next slide. That's a walk through our Merlot blocks looking north. The Alexander Valley is to your right there. And we can continue. So that's obviously in the fall, but again, our vineyards as they exist today. But I do want to point out, but this is not the way the property was when I found it. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this was the road up. It was completely undeveloped land. It was completely undeveloped land when I found it. That's why this became a huge project for us. But when you get to the top of the property, the first couple of times I visited, there were these wild boar on the property, and they were bigger than our kids. So it was a little bit concerning.
Well, now, when you say when I found the property, it looked like this, and this was the road up, did a real estate agent find it, or did you find it? And this is you guys driving up to the property.
I actually, I found it on the MLB, what do you call it, the
MLS?
Their listing service.
Yep.
I learned how to get into that. I've been looking for property for quite some time, and I didn't always want to bother my vineyard realtor every time I wanted to see something. So I'd sneak in there, and all of a sudden this property appeared on that with no pictures, just like these parcel maps. And you've all the great pictures you can put up there, no pictures, but he had just put it on. So I was on top of it, and I was the first to see the property. And
wow.
so just to continue the discussion here, when you get to the top of the property, there were all these open hillsides and ridge tops that look like they really lend themselves well to vineyards. So, that's when we decided to go for it and put down a deposit on this property and try to make it work.
Yeah, it's spectacular.
Yeah. And that just shows where we're located. This is the north coast of California, with San Francisco in red and the Napa Valley in blue. And so we're obviously to the west of Napa, we're that star between Healdsburg and Windsor.
Well, interestingly enough, this actually is a great pictorial depiction of something we talked about the last couple of weeks with regards to the spacing of the towns in Napa and Sonoma. And we did something recently on up in Knights Valley, Moran Manor, that has about 3/4 of an acre of land, and it's surrounded by 600 acres of Beringer Knights Valley. These towns are all exactly 7 miles apart, because that is how long the stagecoaches could go before they had to stop and change the horses. So every single time they'd change the horses, it was about 7 miles. They'd get a fresh team of horses. I mean, it's perfect how you can see that right here.
Awesome.
That one,
All
oops, I'm
right.
going backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this,
Well,
go ahead.
We discussed the Appalachian map, so we could probably move on from there. So, the point I made that's important about Calluna is that we're in a cool growing area, but another important point is that we have elevation. And elevation helps on a number of points, but one is that we have much less risk of frost in this early spring when the new vines push and they're at risk for frost damage, because cold air goes downhill on those still cold nights where you're vulnerable to frost. So we've been very lucky in that regard.
And
also, we're
Go
above
ahead.
the fog line for the most
Yep.
part. So instead of getting, our vines wet, it's still cool, but we get sunshine, and that's, a good thing to have happen.
Right. And that's exactly what I was going to say. We talked last week and the week before about diurnal days, and you can see that these vines throughout the day would still be getting sunshine, certainly in the early morning when the fog layer is still thick, and the vines on the valley floor would not. So it's interesting. Plus the view doesn't stink.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, just a quick further background on, I mentioned my wife and I and our 3 kids are from the New Jersey area, and we went through this journey. We left there in 2001. So over 20 years ago is when this adventure began. And when we came up to Sonoma County, frankly, we were looking at maybe buying something small. We were thinking maybe we could handle 5 acres on its own, on our own. But again, I saw this offering of an 80-acre parcel. So this property was way too big for what we were thinking of. But again, since it was in the Chalk Hill growing area and was intriguing, I decided to just go up and look at it on a lark. And again, it was so beautiful. I had my family look at it and we decided to go for it. And that meant writing a business plan and raising money to make it work. And there's a little bit of a story in that you see Martin's cursor on the guest house there. When we went to write the business plan, my wife had this idea that turned out to be quite a good idea. She said, we're zoned to do a guest house. So why don't we build the guest house first and we'll call it the partner's house. And when investors put up the original funds for Calluna, they got ongoing rights to use the partner's house. And so that really made the investment a success because it gave these people something concrete and something up front because they could come visit Calluna and see it grow from the very beginning. And, they've all become our investors. There may be 20 of them, like family to us. I mean, some literally are family, but not too many.
Right.
But his friends who heard about this and they're really into wine. And, they got not only their stay that they get it every year at the partner house, but once we started making wine, they get their wine allocation. And so, and we're lucky, things have gone well. And, in the last 5 to 7 years, we've gotten terrific reviews on our wines, which you can see on our website, on our press area. And so the investors are quite happy for the most part. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, and some of us have actually stood on this driveway, walked around to the back at yours and Marla's encouragement to say, hey, go check out the guest house. And you actually look out the views this way to the guest house versus this way. And the views are insane, everybody.
Yeah.
So this is something that as David will share, it's something that goes to the partners, but there are a few select months out of the year where it is available for wine club members or on Airbnb.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's just another
crappy view
of the vineyard. So, and as we say, we've been making wine for 16 years here, and we only make wine from our own vineyards. We're not buying in any fruit.
It's just incredible. And I like the fact that it's limited production. It's all hands-on. And so we're going to walk through you just got done doing all this. So harvest is behind you.
Yeah, so I thought I'd take you through a very important element of winemaking. It's what you do right after you pick the grapes. It's called the crush line. And here's this long set of equipment, and I'll just take you through this step by step real quick. You bring your grapes to the winery and you make that dump onto the front end hopper there. Go ahead, you can advance, I think. One more. We see a dump there in action. And then if you advance, you'll see we have a guy up front with a rake who kind of meters out the clusters onto the first sorting table. So the grapes here are still on the rachis or their cluster stems, as we say. And so the grapes now go over the first sorting table. And this is a real important place to take out what we call MOG, material other than grape. And that's mostly leaves, but there are bugs that go through, even sometimes pieces of the trellis system that certainly shouldn't be there. And this is really a family affair here, because you'll see on the right side, starting with the red shirt, that's our son Peter, our daughter Amy, then me, then my wife Marla, then across the table is cousin Daniel. And you see this is a very important place to, it's this step. You do this some in the vineyard when you're picking too, but this is a really important step to deliver the purity of the fruit first to the fermenter and then finally into the bottle. So
then it leaves there and comes up this.
Yeah, up the clusters go up that conveyor into the stemmer. And then the stemmer is kind of a magic machine where stems come out the back and you see there's almost no berries on those stems. And we can forward, and there's just a woman compacting the stems, but slide forward and you'll see the berries coming out onto the second sorting table. So you get another chance to sort and pull out things that shouldn't be in there. Yep, and we can advance. So that's our son Peter and niece Heidi there. And so then we go into kind of the final phase. We have stomping of the grapes, which we don't always stomp grapes because there is an alternative, which I'll talk about in a moment, but people are often interested in the stomping of the grapes. And the purpose of that is to open up enough berries so the fermentation will start and you get some good extraction early on in the fermentation. But you can use rollers too. So here's an example of rollers, which are actually a little bit better at breaking up fruit in a more predictable way. You know, when you stomp on grapes, the grapes tend to go flying out the side of your foot, and it's kind of unpredictable and a little bit of a circus, frankly. But here we are at the end of the process where we're really delivering very clean fruit to the fermenter.
Super pretty, just beautiful berries.
And so,
and when you make
mentioned,
great fruit from great
Yep.
land and have a great pedigree and vineyard sourcing and all hands on, you tend to get recognized.
yeah, so we've had some really great recognition for the Cuvee, as I say, not only for its quality, but its value too. And here's we went, this is for the prior vintage, but when Wine Spectator did their Merlot issue, they got quite a good sized picture in there, and they said we made one of the best Merlot blends of the year from our vineyards in the Chalk Hill growing area. So that was quite flattering. And the one you're drinking right now, the 18, a very important critic in New York, John Gilman, writes about the 18. This has been one of California's finest values in the world of Bordeaux blends for many years, but the 2018 may well be one of the most complete vintages yet for this lovely Cuvee, 94 points. So that's good to hear and very helpful for us.
Well, and I'll go back to that because when at the start of the program, I talked about at $35, it is arguably one of the finest wines I've had from California, sub $40. And Mr. Gilman and I don't know each other, but I think we have similar tastes because this is off the charts and it would easily be $90 to $100 in another valley over the mountain. Many of you always ask about the fires, and rightfully so, because all of us don't live in fire areas the way David does. And these next few slides are going to give you kind of an idea and view up close and personal on what the experience was like at the estate.
Yeah, and I'll just say as background that, for those of you who are not in California or the West, traditionally, historically, it doesn't rain here from about April to October, which coincides with the growing season for grapes. And that's one reason why it's a great area to grow grapes. As long as you have irrigation water, groundwater when you need it, it's good not to get rain, because grapevines, both the leaves and the foliage and the fruit, don't like to get rained on. So it's historically we get no rain. So California's always been a tinderbox, in the fall, and we've always had fires here, but it does seem to be getting worse, particularly in wine country here. Since 2017, we've had fires, all around us almost every year. We've had a couple of years without it recently, which is nice. But these first couple of shots are shots of the 2017 fires. That's when fire literally, started coming to our door. And this fire blew up. There were a couple major ones actually at the same time, but the most important one was the Tubbs fire out of Calistoga. And the wind blew it kind of just missed Calluna, but it went into Santa Rosa and wiped out about 3,000 homes. It was just a horrible, horrible fire, but it was so hard to put it out. This was like day 5 of the 2017 fires, where the firefighters are fighting fires down in Santa Rosa, and we're going, hey, this thing's coming right at us. This is looking out our back door. Now it's moving kind of slowly at this point, but it became like a typical thing to look out your back door and see this shot. Now, so this is a shot of the 2019 fires. We were not damaged by the 17 fires, but we were hit by this fire. It started north of us in a rugged area on a Wednesday night. It got out of control on Thursday and Friday because they couldn't put it out. And then the authorities announced huge winds are going to blow towards Windsor and Healdsburg on Saturday. So they ordered the largest evacuation of Sonoma County ever. So we had to leave on that Saturday, and on Sunday, indeed, the fire came right through our property. So if you show the next slide, that's an aerial shot of Calluna, our property, and you can see every aspect was burned. And I mean, it was so horrifying. But a couple things you have to notice here, because something happened I was not expecting, and that is firefighters came up Sunday morning, crowbarred down our front door and set up a staging area there and saved the houses. As you see Martin's pointing to the main house and the guest house below that little area of green were completely saved. And the vineyards tend to save themselves. Vineyards are great fire breaks. And that's really the reason why the firefighters were willing to stay at our house, because they said, you're surrounded by vineyards, we can defend the house, and more importantly, we can defend ourselves if the fire comes through. And indeed it did. But as great as that was, we lost about 15% of our vineyard on the backside of not on this side, but on the backside, because the fire came. You see that's a great shot of Mount St. Helena up there. The fire came from that direction.
Incredible. Yeah, it's a perfect example of just how much a fire break vineyards are at 97% water. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. And as bad as that was, the world greens up pretty quickly. You get the first rains, and it's amazing how things start coming back. Now you're pointing to a section with the trees. Yeah. And even those areas have improved greatly, but I did lose a lot of trees. I had to spend a lot of money taking down trees. And that was painful, because that's really, in the end, one of my biggest losses, some of the beautiful oaks around here.
Yeah, you can still see remnants of it, but boy, you're right, it does green up nice.
Yeah, so this was just some shots of the replant, where some areas we replanted just specific vines within a vineyard, but some areas we replanted the whole vineyard block. And it's quite a pain, because you got to rip out the old trellis system, put in the new one, and then plant. And if you move forward here, yes, you see, you have to rip out everything with a bulldozer, with just shanks, and use the front end of the bulldozer, make these piles. And you can't just take those piles to the dump or recycle with the metal and the wood all entangled. So the industry accepted way of dealing with this is by setting them on fire, burning them. So you burn the wood and it separates out the metal. But God, the last thing I wanted to do was start another fire at Calluna.
I was going to say,
you can see we waited till everything had greened up, and you see me standing there kind of nervously in front of my 18.
Right.
There.
And that's what all the neighbors want to see, is smoke on the horizon.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And then go to the next shot, because this is what it looks like, to the neighbors. And it's disconcerting. I was glad when that was over, believe me.
No, it's incredible. And I want to show folks a little bit about what it looks like from our vantage point, a little bit higher up. Google Earth, because I know I would have gotten texted immediately following the program had this not been on. It is, David, a hallmark of the program, and it's something that the Discovery Channel has asked the rights for, but we're holding firm on our price.
All right. I can't wait to see it.
So the wine region for Cellar Angels, for those of you that are new, this is where we play. We play specifically in Napa and Sonoma. And David talked a great deal, thankfully, about the Sonoma AVA, and we talked a little bit about the 18 sub AVAs in there. But this gives you a close bird's eye view of kind of the sizes of these AVAs, of these counties, if you will, but also the maritime influence. And I don't care where you are, whether it's New York, whether it's Canada, whether it's Old World or New World, all the great wine regions are going to have a maritime influence. There will be water somewhere close by. It influences the weather patterns. Napa and Sonoma benefit from the Mediterranean climate. They have lakes, they have rivers, they have just about everything you would want to have in a canvas to produce great wines, including 6 of the 12 soil types in the world. There is no tapestry like this anywhere to produce great wine. The wine that we're talking about with regards to where we were last week, if anybody remembers when we had Adolfo on, to give you an idea of how close these two properties are. So this was the block that we looked at last week where Adolfo sources his Cabernet. And if I zoom in here and click on places, over here, I can see this little thumbtack, which is Calluna. And if I were to just scan over here and come across the valley to David's property, I can see Calluna Vineyards. And it really is not that far away from that standpoint. It's, if I go back out, click on the ruler, you know, as the way the crow flies up and down, you're looking at 1.38 miles, not that far away from Notre View, from a standpoint of where we are in Chalk Hill in relationship to Windsor, in relationship to the Russian River Valley, the coast, and all of that. Calluna is just an exceptional property. As you were able to see, it literally is on top of a hill. And I don't know how much wind you get up there, David. I don't know if you have clothesline to dry out the laundry, but I imagine it can get pretty breezy up there.
Well, it's not a windy area here, so
Okay.
that's good. But having said that, when the wind blowing, we have exposure, yeah, and it can be windy. But for the most part, you know, you sit out and it's very calm, beautiful.
Yeah, it's spectacular. And I want to give you an idea of the hill that we're talking about here. Let me flip this around and we'll use our handy dandy ruler. So there's a quarry down here that you will drive by when you come into off of, I think, Brooks Road, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And you go from here, the quarry down here on this road up to Calluna. And when you have this property, you get to see a little bit about the elevation of this. So now when I'm here at the bottom, I'm at 269 feet. And going up that road, which David showed us earlier, that had no pavement, was just a path through the woods, you're going up and up and up and up in elevation. And now you're up over 600 feet. So you're going up 40 stories of elevation to get to the top. And this is where David has planted these vineyards and now 18, 19-year-old vines, 100% estate fruit. It is just a magical, magical place. It looks beautiful from that vantage point, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Just spectacular. An abbreviated Google Earth, and I apologize that I missed the cue from Mission Control in my ear to turn on cameras, so that was my fault. I'd like to, did the wine get any smoke taint? Alicia is asking.
Well, no. You know, in both 2017, 2019, the fires happened after harvest. So that really wasn't an issue, getting smoke taint on the wine. The 1 year where this will be a question for lots and lots of people is 2020, because that's the year where fires kicked off early and were going crazy during the growing season. There were dry lightning strikes in August that lit half of California on fire. The fires were far enough away from us that we believe we're okay on our 2021. You may know there are lots and lots of people who didn't even pick their 2020 red grapes.
Nope,
because
exactly.
the fires were close to them. There was so much smoke. On these hillsides, and because we had the distance away, you know, we've got pretty good circulation up here too. We seem like we're okay. I did some testing on them and the wines are showing clean, they're tasting clean. The other issue with 2020 is we had like at least 3 really heavy heat spikes. We lost about, 20-25% of our fruit due to that. And so it was kind of a rough harvest that way too. So, my 2020s, I felt, they have a little bit of a baked element to them. But the reality is 17 was a little bit like that too, because of the heat spike there. And that evolved out so nicely. So it seems my 20s are going in that direction. So I'm actually quite optimistic we're going to do okay in 2020. The sort of the big question is critics may just skewer the whole vintage. So it may be hard to sell anything with that number on it.
I hope they learned from 2011 where they skewered that whole vintage too, right?
Exactly.
And then later on had to eat just about everything they wrote.
Yeah.
This is so you see Jeff and Jane that were with us, that were on the property. Jim Brubaker, who I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say his last name, but it's written in the lower left-hand corner. that also is celebrating a birthday this evening that was there, and Julie was there. So the Sipsters are representing, as we like to say. Jim B has the Sauv Blanc in his glass in addition to the Cuvee, and that's a great Sauv Blanc, by the way. And I want to compliment David and Marla on the hospitality, because not only did we invade this wonderful estate that is bucolic, just gorgeous and ethereal and sensory pleasing and soulful, nourishing. They had a cheese spread, they had a charcuterie spread, they opened up bottles of wine, and we were filming there. So when you look at the video of David and I, keep in mind that Marla is entertaining a ravaged group that hadn't eaten all day and was like grazing cattle. It was unbelievable the way they, no, they were fine. But Marla's hospitality was unbelievable, as was yours. So we're continually indebted. And I'm just loving this Cuvee. I mean, it is incredible, just delicious. So thank you, sir.
Yes, well, thank you all very much. And yes, consider coming visiting if you're ever in the area. You got to look up Calluna Vineyards. We don't have a formal tasting room, as Martin's sort of alluding to, but we do see people who are interested in learning more about our wines up here by appointment, and we can put on a pretty nice tasting on our covered patio out here overlooking the vineyards. And so check us out, or check out our website, and
it's
hope to see you.
I promise you, you will not be 8 deep at a tasting room. You will be sitting down in paradise and tasting amazing wines. It's spectacular. Next week, we are in the wonderful, capable hands of a guest I'm not going to name, but we're going to be learning all about the origins of white Zinfandel. Sort of joking on that, but it should be intriguing, that I promise you. With our friends Ross and Jennifer Halleck, also of the Sonoma region. So that will be fantastic. For those of you, I would encourage you, several folks have texted us and said, hey, I'm not getting the emails. Make certain you put Cellar Angels as a safe sender, because some of these emails, thank you, Karen, she's nodding, going, nope, not getting emails, which could be, now, hear me out on this. I'm wondering if Brent has sabotaged all of your email domains so that he gets the quiz questions ahead of you and you do not. There might be something to that, because he's answered like all of them correct. I'm not certain what virus that is, but I'm not ruling that out. All of you, please stay safe. By the way, it is baseball season, and I always consult the good book, the old book, when it's baseball season. So I'm reading a lot about the world champion Chicago Cubs from 2016. I know it's been a while, but this is my tried and true testament. Chris, I know you can feel my pain with regards to my Cubs, but thank you all for attending. David, you've been an incredibly gracious host, as always. We owe you a debt of gratitude in that capacity. Give Marla our best. Keep doing what you're doing, because the proof is in the bottle. It's outstanding.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank
Stay
you
safe and be good to one another.
All right. Bye now.